and not just 2022, folks, but specifically what's going to transpire on October 15th at Rice-Eccles Stadium, because it might be the most important game of the Pac-12 season. And we got Steve Bartle on the line from 247 Sports, and you can catch Steve again on Ute Zone 247 Sports to help us talk some Utah football. Steve, how you doing today?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing well. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate you reaching out, and excited to talk football.
Absolutely. Let's get right to it. And I'm going to dive in first, and then we'll let Matt pick your brain a little bit on the Utes. But I think it all starts and ends with Utah football with Kyle Whittingham. He's been there forever. He is the Pac-12 Dean of Coaches. He's not flashy. He's not, going to win any recruiting wars in terms of the offseason when we look at the top 5 or 10 in the nation, but he continues to just get it done. And of course, found that elusive Rose Bowl berth last year. Just talk about what makes him so good at his craft.
Yeah, Kyle Whittingham, man, he's a special cat. He's a guy that he knows who he is, and he doesn't budge. Like, he knows who he is. He knows what makes his program work and how they thrive and how they find success. Like, he knows that, and he doesn't deviate from that. What they do such a good job of is focusing on guys that love football, that really want to play football. And, Kyle Whittingham and his staff, they've certainly seen an increase, in terms of not only their success on the field, but also off the field, on the recruiting trail. They've, had more success with the 4-star and 5-star type guys, but they remain true to like who they are. That, you hear Kyle Whittingham talk about his program at any signing day press conference. He's going to talk about the fact that, we're still a player development program. We still look for the guys that, maybe aren't ready to go right away, the instant impact type guys, but in a year or two, these are going to be really good players. And that's what they focus on. They focus on guys that, have the elite traits that maybe just need some time. And they do a tremendous job of coaching up their players and, over the course of their careers, get a lot out of them. And so that's really what Kyle Whittingham has built his program on. That's the foundation, is player development. They've done a great job of figuring out what types of players, what types of prospects work best in that. And they stick to it. They stick to their guns. They stick to their recruiting process and evaluation process. And, it's culminated this last season in their first Pac-12 championship and Rose Bowl berth. And now they're heading into 2022 with greater aspirations and hope for even more.
Steve, I'll definitely want to talk about the 2022 Utes, but first, a historical question, kind of a look back question. And that is, entering 2018, Utah had not yet made an appearance in the Pac-12 championship game. And obviously the fan base was restless. And, there was a question of, would Kyle Whittingham be able to get over the hump? What changed in, 2018, 2019, lifting the program to the next level, getting into the Pac-12 championship game multiple times, raising the bar, turning the corner? What, in your estimation, was the thing that really pushed Utah to a higher level?
They got quality quarterback play. Tyler Huntley turned out to be a pretty good quarterback for them. You look over the years, and it was a lot of struggle in the passing game and finding guys that could be efficient but also explosive. And I think Tyler Huntley really took a big step forward in his game in 2018, and then built on that. In Andy Ludwig's first year back with the program in 2019, and he took a tremendous leap where, Utah started a Heisman campaign late in the season because of how well he was playing, which really says a lot, about Utah. You talk to anybody around the Pac-12 that covers, Utah or has an idea of what Utah is. It's a program built on defense, and it's a program built on running the ball. And what's always kind of been that missing piece is quarterback play. And I think that's really what the difference was for Utah in 2018, where they got that quarterback play. They had a good defense. And you look at what 2018 and 2019 look like on defense. Utah had a number of NFL players on those two defenses. You look in the secondary, Jalen Johnson, Julian Blackman, Terrell Burgess, all guys, even Javelin Guidry, he's still with the New York Jets. That's 4 NFL players in your secondary. That's a tremendous group. And then you look at what they had up front. So all of that kind of came together in 2018. But it was really the difference for Utah was the play of, at that quarterback position. And it's only continued to get better because of, they were able to capitalize that role, Tyler Huntley's play on the field onto the recruiting trail where, now they've got Cameron Rising kind of carrying that torch, and it continues to move forward. So really the difference was quarterback play.
All right. So now let me carry that topic of quarterback play into 2022. And, we all know that Charlie Brewer started the 2021 season. And so you can't blame Cam Rising for those early season losses in September. So Cam Rising was nearly untouchable in terms of delivering wins and losses for Utah. And of course, had the great Rose Bowl and unfortunately got hurt. But the question becomes, does Cam Rising just need to match his 2021 standard of play for Utah to defend its Pac-12 title, or will he need to be several notches better to deal with not just USC, but all challengers in the Pac-12? Is maintaining the standard enough, or does he need to find another gear in his level of play?
No, I definitely think he needs to, take another step forward, right? You can't be complacent. You're not moving forward, you're moving back. And especially with what USC has done, this offseason with Lincoln Riley coming in and revamping that program, the amount of talent that they've brought in especially on that offense side of the ball, really impressive. So yeah, Cam is going to have to take another step as a quarterback. And, the big thing with him that you can count on week in and week out is he's going to be a guy that leads the troops. And you talk to anybody that knows him, he's just got that it factor, that swagger, that uncanny ability to just roll with the punches and bring his best. And so you can count on that weekend. What he needs to do and evolve as a quarterback, is, improving his play, his throws down the field. He can take a step there. He can improve his decision-making even more. He did a great job of taking care of the ball, 20 touchdowns to 5 interceptions last season. You look at some of the efficiency numbers, yards per throw and yards per attempt and that kind of thing. And that's where Cam can kind of take that next step as a quarterback. He can, be better and more efficient, complete more passes to take that next step. So I think that's the mindset for him, going into the season. He knows he has to be better because he knows the Pac-12, in this former South Division, is going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a lot better. So, Cam and the rest of the offense, the skill players around him know that they've all got to take a good step forward. So yeah, Cam absolutely has to be better going into 2022.
Got Steve Bartle on the line from 247 Sports. It's Ute Zone. Catch his work right there. We appreciate Steve being here to break down the Utes. And of course, Utah and USC will get together in mid-October to possibly decide what we would have thought a month ago or so to be a division championship. May it be a 1 or 2 seed in the Pac-12 championship game. We will see. There might be a rematch. That would have not been the case in previous years. Do you have any thoughts about that, Steve, in regards to George Kliavkoff, kind of getting ahead of the other conferences? This has been the talk of college football during the offseason. One of many has been, do we disband divisions? Is that better for a potential expanded playoff? And he stepped up, and for the first time in a long time, the Pac-12 was ahead of the other conferences and making a move.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great thing for the Pac-12, right? If the goal truly is to make it to the college football playoff each and every year, this makes the most sense, right? You get your best teams, in the Pac-12 championship game. It's going to produce the best results for, the conference as a whole. So I think it was smart, maybe long overdue. Glad that they made this decision. And I think it's definitely going to benefit the conference as a whole moving forward. I think it was a great decision.
We appreciate D-Rock Irish being here, Notre Dame fan who's tracks all of our shows. Says, any word or thoughts on how long Kyle Whittingham will continue to coach at Utah? It was something that approaching the Rose Bowl, I hadn't heard a whole lot about. And then suddenly there was a lot of talk about that. Heard it might be 1 to 2 years left.
Yeah, no. So with Kyle Whittingham, he just kind of redid his contract with Utah, where now he's one of the highest paid coaches, at least on public record, in the conference. And I think he's earned that. He's worthy of that contract. That contract goes through 2027. I think he's got a couple more years left for sure. I would say, 2 to 3 is probably where I would place my money. I don't think he's going to call it quits after a year. I think he's got a few more years left at least. But do I think he's going to coach through the entirety of this new contract, which is 2027? I don't think that's the case. I think we'll see 2 to 3 years, and Kyle Whittingham has talked about it himself. He's getting close and having more of these thoughts of life after football. And so, yeah, I think, it's obviously close, and it'll be interesting to see what Utah does moving forward with that. But he's always going to remain close to the program. He's got something in his contract where he'll be a special advisor to Utah athletic director, and kind of just be around the program still. So he can't completely quit it. It's always going to be in his blood. He loves this program. He loves Utah, and he wants to see it continue to succeed even after he hangs them up.
Got our guy Tim. He's got a question for you, Steve. How much of a step back do the Utes take on defense with losses like Devin Lloyd?
Yeah, Devin Lloyd is obviously, anytime you lose a first-round talent, that's a lot to replace. But the big thing is with Utah is they always have guys, whether it be at the same position elsewhere on the defense, ready to step up. And I think you look at this year's team, you start with Clark Phillips, cornerback. He's kind of had his coming out party against Ohio State, a team that he was previously committed to before he signed with Utah in 2020. And so you look at him to kind of take on that mantle as kind of the face of the defense and the leader of this defense. But, what Utah did to negate as much as they could with the loss of Devin Lloyd and Nephi Sewell, his running mate at linebacker. They went into the transfer portal. They brought in a guy like Muhammad Diabate out of Florida. This is a guy with 3 years of starters experience at Florida, tremendous athlete. And, he's going to be a guy that comes in and competes and is able to contribute. He's going to be a guy that they rely on just because he has that experience in playing in big games. I think that's kind of the thing that they need most. They also, great timing here. The younger brother of Jackson Barton and Cody Barton, who's in the NFL as a linebacker with the Seattle Seahawks, former Utah player. The youngest brother, Lander Barton, was borderline 5-star type kid. He was rated number 40 according to 24/7 Sports in the entire class. He signed this past cycle, enrolled early, so he was able to participate in spring ball. High expectations with him, and he's going to be a guy that they expect to contribute in year one. So, Utah, it's a mixture of guys stepping up elsewhere on the defense where they rely on others, but then they've also done a good job of bringing in guys over the last year to negate the losses of Devin Lloyd and Nephi Sewell. So, it's still going to be, Kyle Whittingham's defense. Whenever they lose guys, there's always that question mark of, well, the defense is always, it's going to take a step back for sure this year. And then, they always seem to end up top 3, top 4 in the conference. So you can always count on Utah to just kind of continue that trend in 2022.
All right, Steve. So, USC Utah smack dab in the middle of the season, middle of October. So, obviously, we're going to see how the first month and a half of the season unfolds. It's obviously going to shape how that game is perceived, during the week leading up to kickoff. But right now, sitting here in late June, what's your initial impression, your initial leaning in terms of how Andy Ludwig is likely to attack a very vulnerable USC defense? And the two schools of thought are, on one hand, let's just control the ball for 60 minutes. Let's get 40 minutes time of possession so that Caleb Williams gets bolted to the sideline. Or let's get a big lead. Let's attack that secondary early. Let's test the pressure points. Let's see if we can get like the big early lead that Utah got against Oregon in each of the 2 meetings against the Ducks last season. And then we can just tee off on Caleb Williams in the second half, with that big lead. How do you think Andy Ludwig is going to juggle those two fundamental tension points and how he attacks USC's point of vulnerability, the defense?
Well, I mean, Utah is always going to emphasize running the ball, right? Like, they are about shortening the game and controlling the clock. that's always going to be Kyle Whittingham's MO. And I think Andy Ludwig, is a guy that buys into that, and buys into, being efficient with the ball, controlling the clock, but also being opportunistic. And I think they showcased last year they were one of the most efficient as well as one of the most explosive offenses in college football. And so they have that ability to be to attack you either way. And so they can kind of allow the game to develop and unfold. But you go into that game expecting Kyle Whittingham to want to control the clock, to want to, run the ball and emphasize that physical dynamic that they have up front and with their running game with Tavion Thomas. You've got a guy that's built like him at 6'2", 6'3", 235 pounds. You want to emphasize that. And they've got other running backs that they can utilize and will utilize. A guy that they're high on is Jalen Glover, running back, freshman out of Florida. And also Mekhi Bernard, who's another running back out of Southern California. They've got weapons, in the run game that they want to utilize. And USC is certainly a program where it makes sense to shorten the game, to shorten the amount of possessions each team has. And so that's my first impression looking at that game a few months from now, is I expect Kyle Whittingham and his staff to remain true to who they are. And that's a team that's, again, built on the run game and built on their defense.
Now let's flip this to the other side of the ball. If you're in Kyle Whittingham's position, what's the matchup presented by USC's offense which scares you the most? And I know that Caleb Williams brings so much upside to quarterback, but you also have a very deep wide receiver group. And we know that, we watched Jackson Smith-Njigba of Ohio State, 347 yards against a very undermanned Utah secondary in the Rose Bowl. So really it's a two-part question. One, how does Utah's secondary shape up? But secondly, what's the matchup that you think concerns Utah's staff the most against USC's offense?
Yeah, the nice thing about this game, hopefully anyways, we'll knock on wood right now, but they're not going to be relying on their 7th and 8th cornerbacks on the depth chart like they were against Ohio State, right? So, understanding that, like, you've got Clark Phillips, you've got a guy in Travis Broughton who also returns from injury, who was an all-conference honorable mention in 2020. So he's a guy that, he has a ton of potential. He's a track guy. But really the thing with this USC offense, when you look at what they've done with the wide receiving corps, the run game, they force you to be balanced across the field. And I think that's going to be interesting. It's going to force the entire defense to play disciplined and to be balanced just across the field. So it's going to be tough. It's going to demand a lot of this Utah defense. They're certainly going to be tested. And so, when you look at that USC offense, to me, when you've got 5 wide receivers that USC has, and you guys, I don't have to list them, but when you can line up 5 wide with the types of receivers that USC can, that's tough. That's a tough matchup for anybody, any defense. And so it's certainly going to test Utah, especially because they're a defense that has been built up, so much upon stopping the run and emphasizing that part of their defense. Does this create a shift in mindset for Utah? And I think that's something that we'll learn this year in that game specifically, is how do they approach that game, that matchup. They've been very good in adjusting to various offenses throughout the conference, and we do see a variety of offenses in the Pac-12, but nothing like this with USC. They've always had good receivers. They've always had good quarterback play, but man, not like this. This is something else. So it's certainly going to demand a lot of Morgan Scalley in that defensive side of the ball. And like I said, it'll be interesting to see kind of is there going to be a shift in mindset and shift in philosophy in that game?
Steve Bartle, 247 Sports, Ute Zone. Please join him there. Matt, I don't know how much more you have for Steve. I've got 2 points I'd like for him to address before we let him go. So, Steve, if you got another minute or two.
Sure.
One would be, there have been a lot of references to the Rose Bowl. Of course, Ohio State's at that top end of national attention, the recruiting rankings, offseason hype all the time. And, of course, the winning has proven over the years. USC would be that version inside the Pac-12. Even when they're down, they get preseason hype attention. It's just a glitz program on both accounts versus what Utah does in being more lunch pail and, nobody's going to win recruiting championships or anything like that. Is that something that the players, the fan base take as a chip on the shoulder, an exception to, or has it just been the case for so long that it's not even a factor?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, and certainly requires a number of different answers. And with the guys in the program, they don't really pay attention to it much. That's a point of emphasis for them, is just continue on the work, continue to focus on the task at hand, and continue to improve your craft each and every day. And that's something that they really focus on. And we had the opportunity to actually get together with a lot of the players last weekend and had conversations with them, and that's entirely their mindset. They're trying their best not to buy in too much to the hype and to the off-season talk. They're just focused on the work. So within the program, they're just continuing to do what they do and almost embrace it as a chip on the shoulder. The fan base, man, the fan base is so unique. I think fans love to hear it, but they also fear it. And there's just that weird dynamic of just a mesh pot of different opinions on it. But I think what's changed for the Utah fan base is the fact that Utah did in fact win their first Pac-12 championship. It's kind of, okay, we've done it before. This isn't just, talk. This isn't just hype. We know that we can win it. We know that we can compete at a high level. We took Ohio State down to the wire. So I think it's settled in for Utah fans that off-season talk like this, where you're in the top 5, you're in the top 10, it's productive. Having a guy like Cameron Rising in the conversation for the preseason Heisman and all of that stuff, that's good. Like, you want that stuff going into the season. And I think the fan base, by and large, has embraced that, where something a couple years ago, it's something that a lot of fans shied away from and didn't necessarily embrace because it was a lot of hype and it wasn't validated in years past. So I think it's certainly changed over the last year for sure.
Because I got to think, Steve, that the fan base gets sick of hearing. So last year's Rose Bowl was another version of the 2008/9 Sugar Bowl. That Bama had just lost an SEC championship game. Did they really care about that game? And then in retrospect, after they get whipped by 2 touchdowns, did they really want to be there? That's the national version of what happened there. Last year, leading into the game, again, you're so entrenched in Utah. You guys are talking about the nuts and bolts in Utah. But from a national perspective, all that we were pretty much hearing is, well, if Ohio State wins, then Ohio State wins. They're supposed to win. If they don't, well, they didn't want to be there because they're supposed to be in the playoff and they didn't want to be there and they were missing X, Y. More talk was about Ohio State missing 4 key players than Utah missing. Like you said, the secondary was ravaged. That has to be a bit disconcerting after a while when it's always that narrative playing an elite team.
No, sure. And I think it's something where, you talk to the players and they're entirely focused on, repeating this season and having another special season to validate what they've done over the last couple of years to completely change that kind of narrative. I think it's something where, it can be used as a slight, and it is something that Kyle Whittingham and his staff and the players will certainly use as a slight, as motivation. But from that night, I had the opportunity to talk to a couple players after that Rose Bowl game, and didn't even blink, didn't hesitate. Their whole point was, we want to get back here, we want to win it, and so that was their mindset immediately after the game. They want to get back and they want to, make a point that this was, not some fluke season, that this is, where this Utah program is at. And so it permeates from the coaching staff and from Kyle Whittingham himself. They're going to, again, remain true to who they are. They know who they are. They're going to stick to their process, and, they're going to let the results speak for themselves. And so the fact that, they aren't getting the talk that maybe they deserve because Ohio State ultimately pulled out the victory, or, whatever other reasons or whatever slights the conversation brings their way, I think it's just something that they embrace and use as motivation moving forward.
And then the last point I wanted to hit on and get your take on is well before the USC matchup. Of course, this week 1 game is gaining a lot of attention, and this is going to be interesting. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I got a pretty good grasp on schedules nationally. When I think of Utah scheduling non-conference, I think BYU first and foremost, and that series has been interrupted a little bit here and there, but generally they've played. And then a lot of Mountain West games, a lot of San Diego State, a lot of Mountain West games. I can't think of the last time Utah, I know that, of course, they played a home and home that was split by quite a few years against Michigan here in the last 10 to 15 years. But aside from that game, them traveling east of the Mississippi, going to Florida, that's a unique situation. It's really going to be a measuring stick for Utah and for the Pac-12.
No, absolutely. I think this is a result of Mark Harlan and the coaching staff coming together and really kind of embracing, scheduling bigger opponents and Power 5 opponents, on the other side of the country, right? So it starts this year with Florida, and I think there's a ton of excitement about this game. It's Utah's first trip to the Swamp, and the fan base is going to be out there in full force. What's crazy is with what USC has done over the last few months, I think the excitement is where everybody was amped for Florida and Florida. That was the entire conversation. Now it's that USC game has really kind of pulled a lot of that excitement and a lot of the intrigue, and I guess concern maybe would be the better word. But a lot of what was surrounding that Florida game is now shifted to USC. So still, like, the conference, that still holds a lot of weight, especially that USC game. But I think you look at Florida this year and the opportunity to go there, them coming to Salt Lake City is maybe even a bigger story than Utah going to Florida. I think it's the first time they've traveled west of the Mississippi for an out-of-conference game. So that'll be a big deal. But then you look down the road with a lot of these future schedules. You've got Wisconsin, you've got LSU in like 10 years. You've got Baylor and Arkansas. So Utah's going to be, they've got a few more marquee games on the schedule, which I think is something that's pretty exciting. And, they're going to get it started, like I said, with Florida this year.
All right, great stuff here from Steve Bartle, 247 Sports. Catch him on Ute Zone. Steve, before we let you go, is there anywhere else that people need to be aware of your work?
I mean, utezone.com is where you can find me. I'm there all day, every day. So you can catch me there for sure.
We appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Steve.
thanks, guys.